Hey, welcome back to the program. I'm recording on Thursday, July 3rd, so happy July 4th, 249th year. Next year, the big one, 250. Hearing something unusual for next year's celebration, Trump wants to have an MMA fight at the White House on July 4th, 2026. Seems strange. Do we want that at the White House? That type of violence, gladiator stuff? I don't think so. Anyway, welcome back to the show. It's been a while. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, tell your friends and family to do the same. I want to check in on the big, beautiful bill. By the way, do you know that's the actual name of the bill? One Big Beautiful Bill Act, HR 1. I didn't think that was serious. This kind of stuff really bothers me. Make it a serious name, please. These silly names. Of course, it's not as bad as the Inflation Reduction Act, which was just a Green New Deal. But still, I don't like these silly little names they make for these bills. Donald Trump calls it the Big Beautiful Bill, and that's the name of the bill. Historically embarrassing, no? Anyway, let's check on this. Of course, Democrats are up in arms, as was the case during the Biden administration. Here, during the Trump administration, his first big legislative action, not supported by Democrats. A couple Republican dissenters, not unlike what happened during the Biden administration with his 4 pieces of legislation that were passed. The joy of having a majority, even though it was slight. This was a reconciliation bill, so did not require a filibuster majority in the Senate, 60 votes. So that helped things along quite a bit. So there's some already misinformation out there about what this bill does. Let's be real clear about something. This bill does not raise taxes on anyone, and it does not reduce taxes for the wealthy. This bill extends the 2017 tax Trump cuts that were put in place in his first term, that the Democrat-controlled Congress and White House had every opportunity to rescind during the 4 years of the Biden administration. They chose not to. So they obviously liked the levels of taxation. This is not a tax cut for the rich. This is a tax cut for everybody, which includes the rich. Take the opportunity to go look at the tax bracket tables, and you'll find yourself that the tax brackets in 2014, which there were 7, with a high rate of 39.6%, were higher than in every tax bracket than the Trump tax cuts in 2017. And if you go look at say a 2024 tax table, what you'll find is, again, 2024, during the Biden administration, they had an opportunity to reverse Trump's tax cuts from the 2017 first term. They did not. So you can compare the 2014 tax tables, which was during the Obama administration, to the 2024 tax tables, which was the Biden administration, and you can find every single tax bracket had a reduction in taxation. Everyone got a tax cut. Now, it's also very clear when you look at the tax tables, the highest income earners got a more meaningful tax cut, one could say, 1 to 2 percentage points compared to 0.5 to 1 percentage points for the other brackets largely, but not only. The high tax rate went from 39.6% to 37%. Everyone got a tax cut. Every tax bracket got reduced taxes. That tax policy plan was expected to expire this year, as was the legislation passed in 2017. This simply extends that. It doesn't cut taxes at all in terms of income taxes. So this idea that there's a tax cut for the rich here in this bill, it's just not true. It's extended the tax cuts that were given to everybody in 2017. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind about this rhetoric from the Democrats, that this is a tax cut for the rich. So that clears up that right away. You can go find that information on your own. It's available everywhere. Look for the 2014 tax brackets against the 2024 tax brackets, against the 2025 tax brackets. You'll see nothing changed since 2017. And a comparison to the tax rates during the Obama administration in 2014 shows that a tax cut across the board, including the wealthy. Other thing that I have on my mind is this idea that we have these 10-year projections in these budget plans, which is just so stupid. in 10 years. We have 2 more administrations coming in, 5 more Congresses coming in. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? This idea of projecting out 10 years to score budgets and budget deficits and national debt is just silly. This comes out of the 1970s and 1980s as an effort to become more long-term thinking, something that was engendered coming out of Asia and Japan primarily, about the longer-term view that Asian policymakers had when initiating public policy, and the idea that we can project out 10 years about the behavior of the economy, tax revenues, tax expenditures is just silly. So we have all these projections on the cost of this bill over a 10-year period. I find that to be a waste of time and not really good information. What we do know is that apart from that tax discussion we just had, this is more of the same in Washington. Republicans get control, Democrats get control. Things remain the same. We fuss with tax rates between the 2 parties. Each time we fuss with regulatory burden, of course. But what we always get is more deficits and more debt. And that's the same thing here for the Republican-led One Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 1. Trillion-dollar deficits continue on an annual basis. The debt limit was increased. National debt will continue to skyrocket at $1 trillion a year for several years ahead. And every Republican that campaigned on reducing spending, balancing the budget, and reducing debt has exposed as a liar, or they've failed in their efforts to do so. President Trump rallied, campaigned against Biden's $1 trillion deficits, $2 trillion deficits, the massive spending. And yet here we are, same thing. And so what never changes in Congress since the 1980s is both parties are irresponsible when it comes to the budget, deficit spending, and national debt. National debt is about $36.5 trillion right now. By the end of the Trump term, that's going to reach $40 trillion. Donald Trump has been haranguing Fed Chair Powell for some months now about his unwillingness to cut rates at this stage of the economic cycle, and implying that him not cutting rates is increasing the burden on American taxpayers by increasing the cost of borrowing on this massive amount of deficit spending. And so they don't have much leg to stand on. Go after the Fed for not cutting interest rates, make the interest payments on debt lower, and yet they continue to go through deficit spending. And they'll continue to expect the Fed to monetize that debt. Remember, the Fed accounts for 45% of holdings of outstanding U.S. debt. So that's bothersome. Every Republican, every conservative should be bothered by it, every American. This is a serious, serious issue. Our deficit and debt crisis is real. And the best evidence of that is our interest payments that are now over $1 trillion a year. The other things that bother me about this bill is the elimination of tax on overtime and the elimination of tax on tips. Really bad business. Elimination of tax on overtime bothers me because this is going to be abused by public employees in an area that's already widely abused. Policemen, firemen, public officials abuse overtime across the country, certainly in our biggest cities. And this is only going to incentivize more of that. But remember now, government employees are what we call public goods. That is to say, they are doing jobs that the private sector cannot do itself because there's no profit motive for the private sector. The idea was that in the public sector, public goods, and the people that help provide those public goods to the society will generate lower yearly incomes, but be compensated by pension benefits in their retirement years. Now we have public employees providing goods, public goods and services to society, earning private sector incomes, and have the pension and other benefit plans on top of it. And this is going to just increase that more. So I'm not a fan of that. No tax on tips, not a fan of that. It could really screw up the way people are paid. When we think of tax on tips, we think of service employees, restaurant employees. There's lots of people that get tips, of course. No question, a good majority of tips are never reported. But we're going to see some problems with this as well. No tax on tips. So the debt limit was increased. Remember, this is a reconciliation bill, didn't need a supermajority to pass. And so I just wanted to go through a few things that are largely good. There's no denying that Republicans, working with President Trump, have put through legislation that does affirm what many on the campaign trail in the 2024 campaign cycle talked about. Of course, again, I'll remind you, the biggest thing they talked about they didn't accomplish was reducing annual deficits and therefore reducing national debt. $1 trillion deficits continue, national debt continues to increase. Beyond that, though, we have some positive developments from a Republican or conservative perspective in terms of regulatory environments, supply side economics. Keep in mind now, this is our second, maybe our third deliberate effort at supply side economics since the Reagan administration in the 1980s. Think of the Laffer curve from your economics class, Arthur Laffer, and his back of the envelope graph on tax revenue and tax rates. Or you can think of the Phillips curve in the relationship between inflation and unemployment. The idea of supply side economics is to reduce taxes, reduce regulation, spur investment, spur job growth, spur income growth. The problem with that, of course, is if you don't cut government spending, supply side economics always and everywhere takes you to deficits and debt. Supply side economics did not succeed in the 1980s. It didn't succeed in Trump's first term. It's not likely to succeed in this third effort. Again, while we may see increased tax revenues, unless they're matched by decreases in spending, you still get the end result of more deficits and more debt, which is really problematic. That's the cost of expanding jobs and income. And then, of course, we think of supply side economics, what we're really talking about is reducing taxes on capital, on entrepreneurship, on risk takers, on the wealthy, on those already in place who have the means to take advantage of these opportunities. And so we get some changes in wealth gaps as well through supply side economics. Anyway, some other more positive things that I found in the legislation that I'd like to review with you quickly. There's been some effort to reduce the cost of the SNAP program by imposing work requirements and redefining what adult able-bodied workers are without dependents. It changes the way we account for expenses, household expenses, and then determine how much SNAP benefits a household will receive. And so it's an effort to tighten up the SNAP program, the nutrition program, from abuse by ensuring those who truly need it, that are U.S. citizens, get access to the program. We also see in H.R. 1 increased spending for the Defense Department, the DoD, for fiscal year 2025. So additional funding for Marine Corps barracks, Defense Health Program, supplemental payments of basic allowance for housing to military personnel, and tuition assistance and child care assistance for members of the armed forces. Not bad. And when we think about defense spending, we think about healthcare. One of the drivers of increased defense spending that we don't often talk about is health programs. It's becoming one of the largest expenditures the military has. It's a problem that they've created themselves, not unlike what the problem we have at the national level. But we can see more efforts to try to solidify those programs and increase the cost. Unfortunately, it's going to come with increased costs for the taxpayer. And that's not money used for weapons and personnel and deployments and bases. So some efforts to help soldiers with their lodging and their families and their health care. Some efforts in the bill to get control of the student loan program after the ruin that was caused by the Biden administration. Revises eligibility for federal student loan aid and the amount students may receive, and to enhance loan repayment. Biden administration essentially let most student loan borrowers off the hook for 4 years, 5 years. Of course, made strong efforts to try to eliminate student loans. We think about student loans, they're voluntary. No one's forced to take them. If you take them, you must pay them back, period. If you want the taxpayer to pay back your loan, you're asking people that didn't choose to go to college, who didn't choose to take out loans, to pay your loan for you. That's wrong on so many levels. And so all deferments, all delays, all temporary holds on student loan repayments have been halted as of July 1st, 2025. If you have a student loan, you haven't been paying your loan, you have to pay it back. You'll only be given 2 options to pay back your student loan: a standard loan repayment from the federal government or an income-based repayment plan. Economic hardship and unemployment deferments are over. Those are instigated by the Biden administration. And it restores a minimum payment amount for everyone of at least $10 a month, which is kind of silly, but at least that's something to motivate those who took out loans to pay back their loans. On the energy and commerce side, a lot of efforts to reduce the Inflation Reduction Act. Remember, the Inflation Reduction Act was not an Inflation Reduction Act, and it actually resulted in more inflation. It was a political gimmick imposed by the Democrats. Remember, this is when inflation was up at 9% on an annualized basis in 2022. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It really was nothing more than a Green New Deal. Did nothing to solve the inflation problem. There was a piece of legislation that talked about reducing prescription drug prices for seniors, and that's something that Karine Jean-Pierre leaned on for years. But that was a small piece of the bill and of no real consequence. So we see some real efforts to defund the IRA regulations, especially when it comes to state-based home energy efficiency, the whole freak out over global warming and climate change, increased natural gas export licenses, expedited permitting, funding and refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that was drained by the Biden administration in an effort to reduce gas prices at the pump after the efforts to force a transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Repeals all kinds of Inflation Reduction Act regulation on the environment and protection from the EPA. So good news there for sure. No waste of capital continuing. And importantly, it reversed the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's CAFE standards by increasing them. It was this particular method, the CAFE standards, Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, CAFE, that the Biden administration used or were trying to use to force a transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. And so by increasing the CAFE standards, so the average vehicle produced miles per gallon was going up to 30, 36, 40 miles per gallon, they were using that as a way to force OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, to transition to electric vehicles to satisfy that average. So good news there. On the communication section, I'm a little concerned about efforts with AI and information technology modernization. And what bothers me most is Section 43201 prohibits states and localities from limiting, restricting, or otherwise regulating artificial intelligence models, AI systems, or automated decision systems entered into interstate commerce for 10 years. This prohibition does not apply to any state law or regulation, it says. This is a giveaway to the AI companies, to the tech companies, to the biggest donors. And AI is a problem. AI is going to hurt the economy. It's going to benefit a tiny few, but hurt millions and millions. I know people are having fun using AI, ChatGPTs, other tools on the internet right now. But this is another way we see the connection between entrepreneurs and the federal and state governments. An entrepreneur creates some new technology. Investors invest millions, billions into this new technology. And they want to pay off. Whether technology is good for the country, bad for the country, If they've made investments in it and there's something that it can be used for, they want regulations, laws, and rules put in place that allows this new product to be sold and used in the economy. And that's the case with AI. Huge amount of money has been invested into AI, not asked for, by the way. In order for them to get their money back through public offerings, through revenue streams, they need the legal framework to allow that to happen. And this is what this is. This is a giveaway to those venture capitalists, the early investors, the entrepreneurs, to assure them profits. Moving on, when it comes to healthcare, Medicaid. So there's a lot of rhetoric from the left about Medicaid and that the Republicans are reducing Medicaid for American citizens. That is not true. If you are a legal, verified American citizen who has some challenges in life in terms of income, so remember, Medicaid is a healthcare program for the relatively poor, your program's safe. Your benefits aren't going to change. If you abuse the system, if you use the system in multi-states, if you work the system, if you're not a citizen and you're an enrollee in the system, you're out, you're done. So this is clearly an effort to find waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. And you can be certain there's hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. And you can be sure there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of non-citizens as enrollees in the Medicaid program, guaranteed. We know there are many people in the Medicaid program who are using the names and social security numbers of dead people. That's addressed. This is an effort to ensure that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are more efficient, making sure that those who deserve the access to the care get the care. And this ties into Obamacare. Remember, Medicaid was the primary vehicle the Obama used to get the poor, the uninsured poor, insured. And so you can be sure there's lots of abuse coming from that program as well when it comes to Obamacare. So yes, reduction in spending in Medicaid relating to taking non-citizens off the program, ensuring efficiency, no more waste, fraud, and abuse. And we can think about this when we talk about retail and non-retail pharmacies, the average prices of outpatient drugs for Medicaid. There's some work requirements that are imposed here. Individuals who are eligible for Medicaid as part of the Medicaid expansion population to engage in community service work or other activities in order to qualify for Medicaid. No more sitting down in your basement playing video games and getting Medicaid. Individuals without dependents work at least 80 hours on a monthly basis, complete at least 80 hours of community service, participate in a work program for at least 80 hours, be enrolled at least half-time in an education program, engage in any combination thereof for at least 80 hours. Some responsibilities, some requirements that you need to push through. Remember, these are able-bodied adults without dependents. Some more stuff related to the environment coming out of the Financial Services Committee. They're rescinding unobligated funds from the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program under the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This program is providing funding for energy efficiency improvements in multifamily properties receiving HUD assistance. Remember, this is a whole effort to eliminate gas stoves, eliminate the flow of water out of showers and faucets and sinks, reduce the size of washing machines, therefore water use. Comes to Homeland Security. Increase spending for U.S. Customs and Border Protection for construction, installation, or improvement to barriers, access road detection technology. So increased funding for Customs and Border Protection personnel, bonuses, facilities, fleet vehicles. So good news there. When it comes to the Judiciary Committee and immigration matters, immigration fees have been increased for applications for asylum, employment authorization for asylees, individuals paroled in the U.S., individuals applying for special immigrant juvenile status. Let me see the Committee of Natural Resources freeing up the oil and gas sector from permitting issues, from application fees, from timing, in order to increase production of oil and gas across the country. New efforts to restore coal as a fuel across the country the way it has been. Remember, coal is still a huge part of our energy resources. Directs the Interior Department to publish an environmental review, hold certain coal lease sales, and issue the leases within 90 days. Must also make available least known recoverable coal resources of at least 4 million additional acres. So good news there on energy. The Interior Department is directed to increase the number of offshore oil and gas leases, raises the cap on the Gulf of Mexico energy production. Got money in the bill for the Coast Guard to find more fixed and rotary wing aircraft, long-range unmanned aircraft systems, offshore patrol cutters, fast response cutters. So again, ties in with our defense and immigration policies here. Also, when you think of the transportation infrastructure, again, more efforts to reverse the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. It rescinds unobligated balances for the following activities and programs that were funded as part of the Inflation Reduction Act: the Alternative Fuel and Low Emission Aviation Technology Program, the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program, funding provided to Federal Buildings Fund for conversion of General Services Administration, the Low Carbon Transportation Materials Grants Program. Also increases funds for the FAA, Air Traffic Control Tower and Terminal Radar Approach and Control Facility Replacement, radar systems replacement. We know that's needed. The bill also, in the section on Committee on Ways and Means, makes permanent the tax cuts enacted in 2017 and then obviously reapproved here in this bill. In the legislation, it indicates the tax rates, the new tax brackets that were imposed in 2017 that were again affirmed by the Biden administration in the Democrat Congress during his term. The individual tax rates, 10%, 12%, 22%, 24%, 32%, 35%, and a top rate of 37%. So those are made permanent. Increases the maximum amount of the child tax credit to $2,500 per qualifying child through 2028. There is a piece in this section that bothers me again. In 2017, they eliminated the SALT cap, the state and local tax. For most of my adult life, on your federal tax form, you were allowed to deduct your state taxes, your state and local taxes, to reduce your federal tax burden. That was a moral hazard for the states and local governments. It provided cover for states and local governments to increasingly raise taxes rather than to be more efficient to focus on spending or to raise taxes at a slower rate. And so that became a real problem over the years. And again, definitely a moral hazard. States and local communities were spending money they didn't have under the guise that their citizens who were going to be taxed more would get some of that money back through their federal taxes. And so what bothers me about this bill, another element that bothers me about this bill, is that this bill does in fact increase SALT to $40,000. And that's a giveaway to the rich. It's a giveaway to states and local government policymakers. And so I'm not a fan of this particular piece of legislation. And then we got some more of the Make America Win Again stuff. So the previously owned clean vehicle tax credit is gone. The clean vehicle tax credit by itself is gone. The qualified commercial clean vehicle tax credit gone. The alternative fuel refueling property tax credit gone. Energy efficient home improvements tax credit gone. The residential clean energy tax credit gone. The new energy efficient home tax credit gone. This allows the clean electricity production tax credit for certain foreign entities, facilities that receive material assistance from certain foreign entities, and taxpayers that make certain types of payments to foreign entities. So that's good news. America first, remember America first. Terminates the clean electricity investment tax credit for an otherwise qualified facility. Expiration of zero emission nuclear power production tax credit. So really following up on the promises when it comes to environment and global warming and the silly policies Democrats put in place to try to achieve their goals of net zero at the cost of really damaging the economy and a serious misallocation of capital. Some more efforts in the bill to make sure illegal immigrants are not benefiting from American services, and they have a section on Medicare, ensures that Medicare benefits only go to a U.S. citizen or national, an alien who is lawfully admitted for permanent residence, an alien who is a Cuban citizen or national and meets certain requirements, or an individual who is lawfully residing in the United States in accordance with the compacts of free association between the United States, Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and Palau. It also requires the Social Security Administration to identify individuals who do not meet the Medicare eligibility requirements and to notify such individuals of termination of their program within 1 year. So that's a quick rundown of some of the big pieces of this 900-odd page bill that you can be sure few, if any, members of Congress have read. You can be sure that President Trump has not read. You can be certain most citizens have not read it. I don't intend to read the whole bill. I will complete reading the summary. So my only main concern about the Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 1, is ongoing trillion-dollar deficits and ongoing increase in national debt. I can guarantee there's all sorts of stuff in this bill that Republicans won't like, that conservatives won't like. And I know there's lots of stuff in this bill that Democrats don't like. It does reduce some spending, no question about it. But that spending reduction is over a 10-year period of time, which really annoys me. I don't like the elimination of tax on overtime. I don't like the elimination of tax on tips. I do like the elimination of tax on Social Security, by the way. That was a good piece there. So lots of good things in this bill for conservatives and Republicans. Democrats are, of course, going to focus on those cuts in spending. They're going to focus on Medicaid. They're going to focus on the environment as cudgels to try and reverse the Republican majority in Congress in the 2026 midterm elections. So some risk here for Republicans, for sure. And what every Republican has to deal with is they campaigned on reducing deficits and reducing debt. They don't get much to campaign on anymore. They are going to deserve some pushback from their constituencies, and they should. This debt and deficit problem is a serious, serious issue for the country. You may think it's not. I promise you it is. So that's my summary for the H.R. 1, One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Pretty good for Republicans. Good for the country. Debt and deficits remain bad for the country. All right, that's all I have for right now. Enjoy the 4th of July. Always try to buy American.